Hello, my name's Todd Wilson. I'm one of the facilitators at the Multipliers Pathway process. This is another video in our series of core training material. In our last video, we talked about culture problems. What we learned is that if we want to see a culture of multiplication in our churches, we're going to have to deal with the elephant in the room, which is the fact that less than 5% of U.S. churches have a disciple-making culture, and less than 7% of U.S. churches have a reproducing church culture. If we really look at what's happening in our churches, we have a programmatic or institutional growth culture. And that's a part of what we've got to come face-to-face with as we're working our way through the Multipliers Pathway process. In this video, we're going to dive in a little bit deeper, and I'm going to unpack for you the simple cultural alignment model that we use at Multipliers Pathway. This is a model that was introduced by Brian Zehr, a strategic coach and advisor, and he's boiled just a very simple approach to understanding culture. And even though as church leaders, you're intimately familiar with culture and strategy and vision and all the things, we do have a framework here in Multipliers Pathway where a lot of these things fit together in an integrated way. And it's very important that we enter this process with a common understanding of what we're calling culture, which I'm going to deal with more in this video. So let's jump right in and actually look at the definition of culture. Culture is the integrated set of values, beliefs, attitudes, expectations, and language that influence the behaviors and priorities of the organization's insiders and shape the experiences and perceptions of its outsiders. What's key on this definition is that it's an integrated set of things like values, beliefs, attitudes, expectations, and language that influence how we function and behave, how we see ourselves internally, and how outsiders see us. Herb Kelleher, the founding CEO of Southwest Airlines, said, "The unique core of any company's success is the most difficult thing for others to imitate. Not their products, not their services, not even their unique strategies, but rather the distinctive culture that penetrates and shapes everything they do." Peter Drucker, the father of modern management, he said it really succinctly: culture eats strategy for breakfast. Drucker was all for management. He was for vision and strategy things. Drucker was not saying that strategy doesn't matter. Drucker was simply saying, we can have the best vision in the world, and if our culture's not good, the vision's not going to matter. We can have the best mission, the best strategy, the best leadership. You can go down the list of all of the organizational things we like to focus on for better outcomes. Culture is like the wild card that really supersedes all the other things. So we've got to start with a healthy foundation of culture. In this Multipliers Pathway process, we're going to work on putting strategies together. We just want you to be keenly aware of the importance that the foundational culture element is going to play in what we're trying to do. Let's also be clear about what culture is not. Culture is not vision, it's not mission, it's not products, services, programs, strategy, aspirations, and it is not static. So culture is something that's continually changing. We've got to be on our guard with it. It's not aspirational. Culture is what we're actually experiencing. So why is culture important? I want to start with Ralph Moore. A bunch of years ago, Ralph was leading the Hope Chapel movement. Out of his church, as of today, is well over 3,000 church plants. Ralph's now retired, but a number of years ago, Ed Stetzer and Warren Bird wrote a book called Viral Churches. In that book, they were looking for what they called viral churches. We would call those multiplying churches today. They had a really hard time finding multiplying churches. In fact, when I was the CEO of Exponential, we spent about 6 months just trying to find 3 or 4 multiplying churches in the U.S., and it's very difficult to do. You can find reproducing churches, but not multiplying churches. And when they found Ralph Moore's church and his movement, Bird and Stetzer concluded that the culture of multiplication was so deeply embedded and ingrained in what they were doing that you would have to put a strategy in place to stop the multiplication from happening. I want you to think in our churches today, where would we have to put strategies in place to stop things from happening? We're constantly, in our zeal for growth, We're trying to press strategies for growth. And as soon as we let go of the gas pedal, boom, those things fall back to something less than growth. It's hard to come up with many things that we're doing in our churches that you'd have to put a strategy in place for it to stop happening. But if we're wanting a culture of multiplication in place, we're going to have to do it in a way that it's deeply embedded in our culture. A few videos from now, we'll talk about the difference between reproduction and multiplication. And I've sort of used the words interchangeably here, not probably correctly. I think the way to think about this is healthy reproduction, multiple generations into the future, broad and wide, is what gives us multiplication. Multiplication is an outcome of reproduction. So we can programmatically reproduce some churches. That doesn't mean we're going to have a reproducing church culture in place. And the significance of that is we may reproduce a few times. It's highly unlikely we're actually going to see a culture of multiplication emerge if we're not focused on the culture piece of it. All right. The other thing that not only do we need to overcome this cultural element of institutional programmatic growth, but if we look at what's at the core of a culture of multiplication, there's at least two parts to it. There's the culture of disciple making, and remember, less than 5% of U.S. churches have that. And there's also the culture of mobilization. We need to be mobilizing everyday missionaries to the cracks and crannies of society. I want you to take from this slide that not only do we need to work on overcoming the culture of institutional programmatic growth that we have in most churches, we need to replace it with this culture of disciple making and culture of mobilization. You're going to hear us over and over throughout this Multipliers Pathway process. It is impossible to talk about a culture of multiplication without rolling up our sleeves and working on the disciple making and mobilization. That is why 2 of the 6 elements of the gospel saturation vision scope that's our governing master tool in the process are the disciple makers pathway and the mobilization flywheel. So we're covering these 2 elements that lead into multiplication in the process. All right, the simple model that I told you about that Brian Zehr has given us, I want you to start in the center with values. We're going to unpack each one of these one by one, but what I want you to see here is the alignment that happens. Values and what we intrinsically are driven by internally shapes the narratives, the stories, the words and ideas that we communicate, and those lead people to certain behaviors. And that always happens between what our real values are, what the language and words are that we're using and what we celebrate, and then the behaviors that we're getting. It's rare that you get a misalignment between those things. And we need to keep remembering our goal. Why do we care about putting a culture of anything in place? It's got to be about the behaviors. So let me go through these one by one. Let's define values the way we're going to use them in Multipliers Pathway. And I'm using values, convictions, and beliefs interchangeably, those 3 words. So a value and conviction is individual beliefs that motivate people to act one way or another. They serve as a guide for human behavior. Generally, people are predisposed to adopt the values that they inherit. They shape how we do everything we do. I want you to think of values like a magnetic field. If you think about a magnetic field with a magnet holding something in place, that's how values are. They're always there acting on the things that are in their presence. And we can't miss this idea that generally people are predisposed to adopt the values that they inherit. That's what's happening in the church world over and over. This institutional programmatic growth culture that we have just becomes the normative way of doing business. It's how we start churches. It's how we measure success. And so we just basically inherit from the generation before us and put the things in place that we inherit. All right, this picture takes the values, conviction, beliefs, just take the values all the way around the outside of this box. And what's inside this box are most of the resources of the organization that we have some control over. Programs, budgets, facilities, staffing, technology, calendars, processes, systems, structures, scorecard, all these things that we have control over. And what we're having to do is make continual decisions in all these areas of resources. We have to allocate the resources. make decisions about the resources. And what's happening is it's our values, convictions, and beliefs that are they're always turned on, shaping how we're making our decisions, and thereby by shaping the behaviors that we put in place. If we look back at the simple model again, the alignment between values and behaviors, that's what we're seeing inside this box. There's no escaping it, that the values that we actually have are the strongest influence on the decisions we make and the behaviors that we're going to see coming out of things. And we've got to remember that these values don't define what we do. They shape how we do everything that we do. So let's move on to the second element, which is the language or narrative. So values was first, language, narratives. And this one we don't have to overcomplicate. Language and narratives are the way we communicate the words we use and repeat, and the definitions we live, and the stories we tell and celebrate. So here's the way I think about it. Values are intrinsically what motivates and drives us. Values are something we internally own, and they drive us to do the things we do. Language, on the other hand, is used to inspire and pull out things and pull people in the direction of something. So we can see how the bridge between values and behavior is this idea of language. The values are driving us intrinsically, but it's the language and narrative that bridge that intrinsic drive to the behaviors that we're trying to lead people and inspire people to take. And here's the thing. Both of these things, values and language, they're always at work, and they're either complementing one another or they're working against one another. We just have to be sensitive to that. If we jump to the third element, which is behaviors, I'm just going back to inside that box we had a few pages ago. All of these are the types of resources that we can influence inside the organization. We influence them by the decisions that we make as leaders, and those decisions that we make about programs, budgets, facilities, all these different things, our Sunday programming, how we're running children's ministry, what curriculum we're doing in children's ministry. Just think about the hundreds and hundreds of decisions that get made every week. It's decisions that turn around and influence the behaviors of how we as elders, staff, key leaders, and then the members of the church are going to behave. And so we get this alignment from values to language to behaviors. I want to shift this now to applying this model briefly to a reproducing church culture. So how do we apply this idea of values, language, behaviors? And so here's what we've done. You see the web address there, multipliers.org/pathway/behaviors. We've created a document that has about 30 different behaviors that when a church has a strong, solid, reproducing church culture in place, you see some combination of these 30 or more behaviors. What I'm going to do is just give you a few examples here in this video, and you can download the resource. We're going to be using it throughout our 6 months together, especially when we get to the strategic planning process where you're starting to put a plan for your increased church planting activity. It's going to be important to be looking at these types of behaviors and how you build them in. What I do want to highlight right now, I said it earlier, don't be overwhelmed by 30 different characteristics of a reproducing church culture. I want to remind you, you can become a reproducing church probably by putting one or two of the 30 in place. But the more of these behaviors we get in place, the stronger our reproducing church culture will be, which will lead us to more and more church planting. And all of a sudden, one day, we'll say, we've got a culture of multiplication. We're seeing multiplication come out of this repeated reproduction over and over and over. And what we've got to be focused on is, number one, let's become reproducing churches. Let's embrace some of these behaviors and get them built into a strategy. But more important is let's look at how do we have a strategy that doesn't just help us be reproducing, but helps us put the reproducing church culture in place. So here's a few examples. One of the 30 would be, we embrace and value planting autonomous churches with at least the same importance and urgency as we do local church growth. A second example, we invest at least 10% of the first fruits of our income into planting autonomous churches each year. I'm not talking here about multi-site campuses. I'm not talking about outreach events. If you want to instantly, what's the one action you can take to become a reproducing church? I'm not talking culture again. I'm talking to become a reproducing church. Go home, get your elders to decide that they're going to start tithing to church planting. The simple step, or the hard step, of tithing to church planting is a single action that will move you into the category of being a reproducing church, just that one action alone. A third example is beyond the finances. We are actively involved beyond just giving financially. We seek to be directly involved in things like recruiting, assessing, training, coaching church planners, providing support services, connecting and affiliating with other churches who are committed to church multiplication, staying connected with the latest trends and approaches. Basically, what this one's saying is, yeah, we can become reproducing just by putting our money in, but we really want to be vested, get involved with our time, talent, and our treasure, and having our entire church be engaged in this endeavor of planting churches. And finally, as another example, we have a specific strategy and plan for increasing our church planting activity, and we hold ourselves accountable to that plan. So I've just given you 4 examples here that are off the list of about 30 different behaviors of reproducing churches. I do want your teams to download these, and over the next couple of months, you can be having conversations around them. You're going to use this list of 30 when we get to the strategic planning part of what we're doing. But it'll give you a good broad perspective now to understand a little more about what does a reproducing church culture look like when you look at the integration of those 30 behaviors. So I want to thank you for joining me today. We're going to use this simple alignment model throughout the multipliers process of core values aligning with narratives and language, aligning with behaviors, and we will continually come back to it. Several of the elements of the gospel saturation vision scope are directly covered in this, and we'll be addressing them. We just want you to be aware of the model that we're using here. And finally, join me in the next video. I'm going to press a little bit deeper into this idea of the operating system. I call it the magnet, the ornery magnet that actually holds us locked into this consumer-driven institutional programmatic growth culture that we have. So I'll see you in the next video.